Barack Obama faced an unexpected, shocking attack on live television. The way he responded in just 12 seconds left everyone speechless, and it's a moment every Obama supporter needs to see. The studio lights glowed brightly over the live panel, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Cameras circled slowly, capturing every reaction, every gesture. The audience, a mix of journalists, analysts, and a few invited guests, sat in careful silence, waiting for the discussion to unfold. Tonight, the topic was serious. Critical national issues affecting the entire country. The panelists had taken their seats hours earlier, prepared for an intense discussion. Notes were laid out neatly, papers shuffled quietly, and microphones adjusted. The moderator, calm and composed, began with a brief introduction. "We are here to discuss the pressing issues facing our nation today." They said, "We hope for a focused, meaningful discussion that helps viewers understand what's at stake." Everything seemed to be moving smoothly. Panelists spoke with measured tones, each idea flowing into the next. There was tension. Yes, this was live TV after all, but it was controlled, professional, almost predictable. Everyone assumed the conversation would stay within the boundaries of policy, facts, and debate. Then, like a bolt of lightning, the atmosphere changed. From her seat at the far end of the table, Ivanka Trump leaned forward. Her eyes were sharp, her tone confident, and without waiting for a pause or cue, she cut straight into the conversation. "Before we get carried away, Barack, do you even know who you really are?" The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Silence fell instantly. Cameras panned quickly, capturing shocked expressions on the faces of the panelists. The moderator froze mid-sentence. The audience seemed to lean forward as if drawn to the tension in the air. No one expected this. The conversation had been serious, deliberate, focused on policy, but now it had turned personal in the blink of an eye. The room vibrated with unspoken questions. How would Obama respond? Would the debate spiral out of control? Could the panel regain composure? For a few long seconds, it seemed as if the entire room was holding its breath. The kind of pause where even small noises, the hum of cameras, the faint shuffle of papers felt loud and intrusive. Everyone waited, eyes fixed on Obama, waiting for a reaction. And then he moved. Obama leaned back slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile forming. His demeanor remained calm, unshaken. He didn't react with anger or frustration. He didn't interrupt or defend himself immediately. He simply looked out at the audience, straight into the camera as if addressing millions of viewers at home. "To the viewers watching," he began, voice steady and measured. "It's clear some prefer to deflect personal attacks instead of addressing the issues at hand. But I'm here for serious answers." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Calm, precise, deliberate. Every eye in the studio was on him. Even the panelists seemed to lean forward, drawn in by his composure. There was a momentary shift in the room's energy. The tension remained, yes, but it was now balanced by a quiet authority. Ivanka, however, didn't step back. She was still leaning forward, her expression unwavering. She had thrown the first strike, and she clearly expected a fight. But Obama's calm response didn't escalate. It held the room in suspense. For viewers watching at home, it was the kind of moment that makes you sit up straight, heart racing slightly, waiting for what would come next. It wasn't just an interruption. It was a test, an unexpected moment that could have derailed the entire panel. And yet Obama's reaction made it clear. He wasn't rattled. In fact, it seemed he had anticipated this. Every movement, every pause, every word was deliberate. The contrast between his calmness and the sudden sharpness of Ivanka's words created a tension almost tangible on screen. You could see it in the subtle details. A hand adjusting a microphone. A slight nod from a panelist who realized the focus had shifted. The audience leaning in closer. The tension built layer by layer like the quiet before a storm. Then the moderator tried to intervene, voice careful and measured. "Let's stay focused on the issues." But the room had changed. That simple interruption had opened a door to something far more dramatic than anyone had expected. It wasn't just a question anymore. It was a moment that forced everyone to watch closely, to wonder what would happen next. Would the debate return to calm discussion, or would it spiral into chaos? Every second stretched longer than usual. Cameras caught reactions in real time. Subtle shifts of posture, raised eyebrows, tiny smiles, and nervous glances. The energy in the studio had transformed from orderly debate to high-stakes drama. And in that silence, one fact was clear. This wasn't a typical panel discussion anymore. It had become a test of composure, focus, and leadership right before everyone's eyes. For the audience, this was captivating. They weren't just watching a debate. They were witnessing a live study in calmness under pressure. The kind of moment that could make or break a public figure's credibility in seconds. And all of it began with a single sharp interruption. The room was still heavy with tension. Ivanka's words had cut through the calm of the panel like a knife. And for a moment it seemed nothing could bring back the order that had existed before. The cameras captured the panelists' frozen expressions, the subtle shifting in chairs, the quiet hum of the studio lights. Every eye was fixed on Barack Obama. The audience waited, holding its breath, sensing that the next few seconds would decide how this confrontation would unfold. Obama leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the moment settle in. There was no flinch, no visible sign of frustration. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he gave a slight knowing smile, as if he had been here before, as if he had anticipated this exact moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he looked directly at the camera. Not at Ivanka, not at the panel, but at the viewers, as if to say, "This is about you." To the viewers watching, he said, his voice steady, measured, almost soothing. In contrast to the sudden sharpness of Ivanka's question, "It's clear some prefer to deflect personal attacks instead of addressing the issues at hand. But I'm here for serious answers." The words were simple, short, direct, but they carried a quiet power. They didn't need to shout or threaten. They didn't need to attack back. They held authority in their calmness. For a room that had been on edge, this was a shock in itself, a reminder that real strength doesn't always shout the loudest. The tension in the studio shifted. What had seemed like chaos now carried a new kind of suspense. The audience could feel it, even through the screens. They were watching not just a political debate, but a study in composure, and the lesson was unfolding live. Ivanka, for her part, remained in her seat, leaning forward, eyes fixed on Obama. She had expected a reaction, perhaps a sharp retort, an argument, something to escalate the tension, but he didn't move the way she anticipated. He didn't give her the satisfaction of anger or defensiveness, and in that calm, measured response, the first cracks in her confidence began to appear. The panelists were equally captivated. Some shifted in their seats, adjusting papers and microphones. One or two exchanged glances as if silently agreeing. He's not just answering. He's controlling the room. The moderator, who had tried to keep the discussion on track, paused, sensing that this moment had grown bigger than any agenda could contain. Even the studio audience felt the pull of this calm authority. There were subtle nods, murmurs of approval, quiet breaths taken as people realized what was happening. Obama wasn't just answering a question. He was reframing the conversation entirely. He was taking a personal attack and transforming it into a lesson for everyone watching. And then, almost imperceptibly, the first tension lines began to fade. The sharpness of Ivanka's interruption didn't disappear. Her presence still carried weight, but the panic it could have caused was gone. The studio now felt like a stage set for a different kind of drama, one that relied not on shouting or threats, but on careful control of words and timing. There was a subtle rhythm to his speech, a pacing that drew viewers in. He didn't rush. He didn't over-explain. Each pause was intentional, each glance deliberate. By the time he finished the first sentence, the room had already shifted. He had transformed what could have been chaos into anticipation. The audience was waiting, leaning forward, curious to see what he would do next. And this was the heart of the moment. Patience, composure, the quiet, almost invisible power of staying calm in a storm. He didn't need to dominate the conversation with volume or aggression. His calmness alone was enough to redirect attention, to focus the room, to command authority without raising a hand. Even Ivanka seemed to feel it. Her posture shifted slightly, her confident lean replaced by a subtle uncertainty. The interruption that had seemed so bold a moment ago now felt fragile, almost unnecessary. The room had collectively sensed that the battle she thought she was starting wasn't going as planned. For viewers at home, this moment was mesmerizing. It wasn't just about politics or personalities anymore. It was about strategy, about leadership, about the power of calm in the face of provocation. The drama wasn't loud. It was quiet but relentless. Every second stretched, each pause loaded with expectation. You could feel the tension building, knowing that a larger confrontation was still coming, but that it would be measured, controlled, and decisive. This moment also illustrated something larger, the difference between reaction and response. Many would have reacted impulsively to such a personal jab, letting anger take control. But Obama's response wasn't reactionary. It was deliberate. It was instructional. And in that calm, poised demeanor, he had already won the first round of this high-stakes encounter. As the cameras lingered on his face, the studio lights catching a steady gaze and calm expression, it became clear the storm had not passed, but it had changed shape. What could have been chaos had become a stage for a demonstration of self-control, authority, and focus, and the audience, both in the studio and at home, couldn't look away. For a moment, everyone realized something. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a lesson in presence, in patience, in the power of thinking before speaking. And in the silent spaces between words, the stage was set for what would come next. A confrontation that would test wit, nerve, and composure in ways that no one in the room could forget. The studio had settled into an uneasy calm after Obama's measured response. The tension lingered in the air like a storm that had paused, waiting to strike again. Ivanka Trump, seated across from him, still radiated intensity. Her sharp question had jolted the room, but now something subtle had shifted. For the first time, her confident composure seemed slightly off balance. Obama's eyes were locked on her, not in anger, but in quiet focus, like a chess player studying the board before making the next move. There was a long pause, almost imperceptible as he let the moment sink in. Every camera in the room lingered on his calm face, capturing the tiniest details. The slight furrow of his brow, the way his fingers rested lightly on the table, the steady cadence of his breathing. Then, with the same calm authority he had shown before, he spoke. "You've asked a senseless question, not once, but twice," he began, his voice steady and controlled. "And it's clear what you're trying to do. You want to distract everyone from the real issues." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. They cut through the tension, exposing the intention behind the interruption. The audience in the studio shifted slightly, leaning forward, sensing the subtle power of what was unfolding. But then he raised the stakes. His next words were unexpected, direct, bold, and deliberate. "But I have a question for you," Obama said, his voice firm but calm. "Why do you have an inappropriate bond with your father? And tell me, who is the real mother of Baron Trump?" The room went completely silent. The panelists froze mid-breathe. The moderator, normally quick to intervene, didn't move. Cameras captured Ivanka's reaction, a flash of disbelief, a slight widening of her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw. She had expected confrontation, perhaps, but not this. Not this direct, fearless challenge. The pause was heavy, almost unbearable. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The audience could feel the room holding its breath, waiting for the next move. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a test of nerve, focus, and control. Ivanka scrambled for a response, her sharp confidence wavering. Her voice rose, cracking slightly under pressure. "That's absurd. You have no proof, and this is disgusting. Why bring this up on live TV?" she shouted, twisting his words, trying to regain control of the moment. But Obama didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't allow the room to be derailed by emotion or shouting. He leaned forward slightly, letting his words land with quiet authority. "Because the truth matters," he said, each word deliberate, precise. "The public deserves to understand the nature of the influence and relationships shaping leadership. This isn't about scandal. It's about accountability. It's about responsibility. It's about understanding the decisions that affect millions of lives." The tension in the room thickened. Every word felt weighted, every pause deliberate. The contrast between Ivanka's rising panic and Obama's calm confidence was almost cinematic. Cameras lingered on her reaction, twisting fingers, a faltering posture, eyes darting for an escape. Meanwhile, Obama remained steady, like a rock in a storm, unmovable, commanding attention without aggression. It was a masterclass in control. Viewers at home could feel it. The drama wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the silent power of composure, the calculated force of someone who understood the weight of their words and the impact of timing. The audience felt themselves leaning in, drawn by the suspense. Who would crack first? Would Ivanka regain her footing? Or would the calm authority of Obama dominate the room entirely? Every second stretched longer than usual. Every small movement, an eyebrow raising, a hand twitching, a breath held, felt magnified in the charged atmosphere. And then Obama turned the moment outward. His gaze shifted to the cameras, to the viewers at home, as if reminding them that this wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was a lesson about power, control, and integrity. Leadership, he said slowly, is not about responding to attacks with anger. It's about thinking carefully, speaking truthfully, and maintaining focus even when provoked. This is how we protect the public interest. This is how accountability works. Ivanka's voice rose again, louder now, desperate. You can't say that. This is ridiculous. Completely inappropriate. Obama's calm didn't waver. He didn't need to raise his voice to dominate the room. He simply repeated in slightly firmer terms. The truth matters. And when the truth is ignored or deflected, the public loses. This isn't about emotion. It's about responsibility. At that moment, the studio seemed suspended in time. The clash between panic and calmness, attack and composure had transformed a simple panel discussion into a powerful demonstration of restraint and authority. It was not only dramatic, it was unforgettable. Even the panelists, usually quick to interject, remained quiet, sensing the significance. The audience understood it, too. This wasn't just politics. This was a lesson in presence, in clarity, in handling pressure with dignity. And the way Obama had taken control of the room without shouting, without losing composure, was a moment that would stay with viewers long after the cameras stopped rolling. In just a few minutes, the tone of the discussion had shifted completely. What began as a personal attack had been turned into a demonstration of focus, integrity, and leadership. And while tension still lingered, it now carried respect and admiration for the power of calm in the face of provocation. The moment was far from over. The confrontation had reached its peak, and the room waited with bated breath for what would come next. But one thing was clear. In this exchange, patience, composure, and the courage to speak the truth had won the first battle. The tension in the studio had reached a new level. Obama's calm, deliberate words had stunned everyone. Ivanka Trump's confident posture was starting to falter. Her sharp questions and rising panic created a charged atmosphere that seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could feel it. Every second stretched, every movement magnified. Ivanka leaned forward, her voice rising as she tried to regain control. "You just wait," she snapped, her tone sharp and threatening. "Trump will see you for this and it won't end well." The room seemed to freeze. Even the moderator paused mid-breath. Panelists exchanged quick, worried glances. Cameras caught every flicker of reaction. The tension in Ivanka's shoulders, the narrowing of her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands. It was a moment heavy with anticipation, the kind of pause where viewers instinctively lean forward, unsure of what might come next. But Obama didn't flinch, not an inch, not a micro-reaction, not a change in tone. He remained seated, calm, collected, fully in control of his words and presence. The contrast was striking. One side threatened with volume and aggression. The other remained steady, focused, unafraid. "Do whatever you want," Obama said, his voice even, deliberate, carrying a quiet authority that filled the studio. "You started this and I will end it. You can't handle the truth, and that's why you're running from it. I don't fear you." The silence that followed was electric. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the audience could sense the shift. Where there had been tension and aggression, now there was awe and respect. Cameras lingered on Obama's calm gaze, capturing a subtle nod of determination. Every word had landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, impossible to ignore. Ivanka's composure wavered further. Her voice rose again, frantic this time, but it lacked its earlier precision. She began twisting words, trying to regain footing, trying to turn the moment back in her favor. "That's not fair. You're twisting my words. This is ridiculous." But Obama didn't let her words derail him. He leaned slightly forward, eyes steady, voice firm but calm. "This isn't about you. This isn't about attacks or insults," he said. "This is about the truth, and the truth matters. The public deserves to know the influence and relationship shaping our leadership. This is about accountability, not emotion, not personal threats." The panelists sat in awe, some whispering softly to each other. Even the moderator, who had tried to steer the conversation back to policy, seemed momentarily captivated by the dynamic in the room. The cameras focused on the subtle contrast. Ivanka's frustration and rising panic and Obama's unwavering composure. Every gesture, every expression told a story. Viewers at home could feel the tension through the screen. The drama wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the silent battle of wills, the clash of aggression and calm authority. Every pause, every breath, every glance mattered. It was suspense built without shouting. A high-stakes confrontation that captivated without needing to escalate further. Then Obama shifted his gaze toward the camera, speaking not just to Ivanka but to everyone watching. "Power and influence only matter if we hold them accountable." He said, "Strength isn't in threats or aggression. Strength is in honesty, in clarity, in courage, and sometimes courage is simply standing your ground calmly in the face of provocation." The weight of his words settled over the studio like a wave. Ivanka, realizing that her threats had not unsettled him, faltered. Her voice dropped and her gestures became less precise. The room, which had been vibrating with tension moments earlier, began to lean in toward his message. The confrontation was still intense, but now the focus had shifted away from attack toward leadership, courage, and truth. It was a lesson in control, one that even the panelists couldn't ignore. Every motion and word was a demonstration of how a leader can navigate hostility. Obama didn't need to shout. He didn't need to escalate. His calmness spoke louder than any threat or anger could. The subtle shifts in posture, the small nods from the audience, the way even Ivanka seemed momentarily speechless, all of it emphasized the power of presence and composure. Obama had turned what could have been chaos into a teaching moment. He had shown that responding with control and clarity is more effective than reacting with panic or aggression. Even the air in the studio seemed different now. The tension hadn't vanished completely. It lingered like the residue of a storm, but it had transformed. It was no longer raw aggression. It was anticipation, attention, a recognition of the power of calm, deliberate words. And for the viewers watching, the lesson was unmistakable. Leadership isn't about reacting to every attack. It's about thinking, observing, and responding with precision and integrity. True authority comes not from shouting or threatening, but from holding the truth and standing by it, no matter the pressure. As the moment began to settle, Obama's calm gaze remained fixed on the audience. He had faced a personal attack, threats, and rising tension, and emerged not just unshaken, but commanding respect. The message was clear. Fear and intimidation cannot override honesty, accountability, or courage. And sometimes the strongest response is the quietest one. The cameras captured every second, every expression, every subtle gesture. The audience, both live and at home, could feel the weight of what had just unfolded. The confrontation had reached its climax, and in its wake was a lesson in courage, patience, and the quiet strength of truth. And in that moment, it was obvious. Obama hadn't just survived the challenge. He had turned it into a defining demonstration of leadership. The studio had fallen into a rare kind of silence. The tension that had gripped the room moments earlier had begun to shift. The confrontation between Ivanka Trump and Barack Obama was no longer just a clash of words. It had become a lesson in calm focus and the power of truth. And in that silence, Obama's gaze slowly turned outward. Not to Ivanka, not to the panel, but to the millions of people watching at home. He leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms lightly on the table, and spoke with deliberate care. His voice was calm, steady, and measured, but it carried weight that filled every corner of the studio. "Power and influence," he said, pausing for emphasis, "only matter if we hold them accountable." The words hung in the air. The audience could feel them. There was a sense of gravity, a quiet authority that demanded attention. The lesson was clear. Leadership isn't about threats, aggression, or loud declarations. It's about responsibility, integrity, and the courage to stand by the truth even when challenged. Obama continued, his eyes scanning the room, lingering briefly on each panelist. "True leadership," he said, "is not measured by how we react to personal attacks. It's measured by how we maintain focus, how we hold to principles, and how we speak with clarity and honesty in the face of pressure." The studio audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded subtly, others leaned forward, fully absorbed. Even Ivanka, who had moments ago been so aggressive, seemed to pause. There was a quiet acknowledgement. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about something larger. And then Obama spoke directly to the viewers, breaking the fourth wall as if inviting them into the room. What happens when people in power are not held accountable? What happens when personal attacks, distractions, or manipulations are allowed to dominate discussions? These questions matter, not just for leaders, but for every one of us watching, thinking, and deciding what we value. He paused again, letting the weight of his words sink in. The cameras lingered on his expression, calm, firm, and unafraid. There was no arrogance here, no showmanship, only clarity and authority. It was the kind of presence that commands attention without needing to demand it. Obama then leaned back slightly, allowing a moment of reflection. The studio seemed to breathe with him, the tension easing but leaving behind a sense of gravity. His next words were quieter but no less powerful. "The challenge of leadership," he said softly, "is not to respond to every insult or threat. The real test is to hold the course, to speak truthfully, and to act responsibly even when provoked. That is what matters. That is what the public deserves. That is what leadership looks like." The panelists were silent, captivated by the clarity and focus of his message. The audience, both live and at home, could sense the underlying lesson. Courage is not always loud. Strength is not always visible. True authority is often quiet but unyielding. And then he added something that made the moment personal for viewers. His eyes returned to the camera, connecting directly as if speaking to each person individually. "I want you to think about this. Think about the influence, the power, and the responsibility that surround you every day. Not just in politics, but in your communities, your workplaces, your families. How do you hold people accountable? How do you demand truth? How do you ensure that decisions affecting millions are made with integrity?" There was a subtle shift in the room. The confrontation with Ivanka had been dramatic and tense, but this was different. This was reflective, educational, empowering. The drama of the previous moments had prepared the audience for this lesson. That calm, measured action, guided by principle, carries far more weight than anger or shouting ever could. The cameras captured small gestures that underscored the message. A slight nod from a panelist, a thoughtful pause from Ivanka, a hand on a chin in contemplation from a member of the studio audience. Even the audience at home could sense the significance. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a study in leadership, accountability, and the power of composure. Obama's voice carried a final resonant reminder. Leadership is tested in moments of challenge. It's proven in moments of pressure, and it's remembered in moments when courage and truth rise above fear and distraction. Remember, influence and power are not enough. They must be guided by honesty, responsibility, and clarity. And those are the qualities we should demand, not just from leaders, but from ourselves. The studio remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then slowly the atmosphere began to shift again. Not back to tension, but to reflection. The audience had been given more than a lesson in politics. They had witnessed a demonstration of integrity under pressure, a blueprint for handling conflict with dignity. And in that moment, the viewers at home were left with a question, one that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. What would you do if faced with pressure, threats, or attacks? Would you react, or would you respond with clarity and truth? Obama's final glance at the camera was steady, inviting, challenging. It was a quiet call to action, not for drama or spectacle, but for reflection, understanding, and accountability. It was a moment designed to linger in the minds of everyone watching, long after the debate itself had ended. In just a few minutes, a tense, chaotic confrontation had transformed into a teaching moment. What began with interruption and conflict ended with connection and insight. Leadership, courage, and truth had been demonstrated not in anger or volume, but in calm, composed authority. For viewers, the takeaway was unmistakable. In moments of tension, when chaos and emotion threaten to dominate, the power of calm, clarity, and courage will always resonate more deeply than noise or intimidation. And with that, the studio lights dimmed slightly, the cameras pulled back, and the audience was left to reflect. The debate had ended, but the lesson remained, etched in every moment of composure, every deliberate word, every pause that carried the weight of truth.